Today, we're going to talk about the 3 levels of asset protection: beginner, intermediary, and advanced. Think about it. You're not going to need a fancy offshore asset protection trust if you're just getting started and you barely have your first rental property. And then again, you wouldn't need some basic insurance policy only if you're a multimillionaire with hundreds of real estates in your portfolio. And so you're going to need something a little bit more advanced. But one of the questions I get a lot is, Mauricio, what do I need at my particular level? Do I really need all of these entities? Do I really need these trusts, these insurance policies? What do I need for my particular level? So in this video, we're going to go briefly over the 3 levels of asset protection and give you my thoughts as a former asset protection attorney, what kind of protection you should be looking at your particular level. So let's start with the beginner level. Let's just say that you have a W-2 job or a 1099, but you've got some sort of income, and maybe you've acquired one piece of property, or maybe you've got a personal residence that has some equity in it. What kind of asset protection should you be looking at? The first thing I want to point out, because I think this is super, super important, is that your W-2 income, or your income in general, is a very significant asset. People sometimes come to me and say, Mauricio, I don't have anything, I don't own anything, and I remind them they have income. Income is an asset that you need to protect, meaning if something were to happen, even if you don't have anything physical, they can go after your wages, they can go after your income, and they can have that income for the next 10 years. A judgment against you will actually last for 10 years. So don't ever think, unless you're homeless or you don't have a job, you're unemployed, you always at least have your income, which is a valuable asset. But let's assume you've got a little bit more assets as well. You got a piece of property. The first thing I would obviously have is an insurance policy. You always want to have an insurance policy on your property, making sure that if something were to happen at the property level, slip and fall, a boiler explodes, whatever, and there's a lawsuit against the owner, you want to have some type of an insurance policy that's going to protect you. So that's always going to be your first line of defense, no matter what. So super important there. The next thing I would consider having is an umbrella policy. An umbrella policy simply covers you for any excess liability above and beyond what your current insurance policy will give you. So let's say you only have an insurance policy that covers you for $500,000 or $1 million, but the injury is significant enough where it's $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, then your umbrella policy might be kicking in to cover that excess exposure. Now, you got to be super careful with umbrella policies, and you want to be making sure that you're talking to somebody who really knows what they're talking about, because not all umbrella policies cover all types of insurance claims. And so there's a lot of debate as to whether a personal umbrella policy covers your business activity. So you want to make sure you're talking to an expert, but there are policies out there that will cover you in excess of whatever insurance policy you have at the property level. Now, the big question is whether you need an LLC, a limited liability company, at this point. And I'll tell you, it's a close call, right? Remember, I'm a former asset protection attorney. I don't really have a dog in this fight. I'm not here to sell you anything, but let's just go through the pros and the cons of setting up an LLC here, in addition to, not in spite of, but in addition to your insurance policies. The biggest con, in my opinion, is simply that if you don't have an LLC structure in place, you have unlimited liability. Okay, your exposure is not limited to how much equity is in the house. This house might only have $20,000 in equity, but if something dramatic happens and there's $1 million, $2 million, $500 million judgment against you, it doesn't matter. That judgment is going to go against you personally, and they're always going to be able to get your future assets, whether that's income or any properties or assets you acquire in the future. So that's probably the biggest con of not having an LLC. The other one, of course, is cost. You're going to have to pay somebody maybe $500 or $600 to get this set up. Not just to set it up, but really to tell you, where to set it up, who should own it, who should manage it, all those questions you need to answer. The actual physical setting up and implementation, you can probably get LegalZoom or InkFile or one of those companies, but really understanding where it should be set up and how it should be set up is really what you're paying for. And of course, you've got your annual renewal fees, and so there's some costs associated with that. So those are really the big cons of not having one. Of course, the pros is you save all that. You don't have to spend that kind of money. You feel really comfortable with your insurance policies. I've gone on record of saying I don't really particularly like insurance companies. I think there's a lot of holes in insurance policies, but generally speaking, I would probably lean towards having an LLC as a backstop. Insurance being your first line of defense, and if that doesn't cover it for whatever reason, whether it doesn't cover it or you don't have enough limits on it, then you have at least a backstop, a entity that will limit your exposure to what's inside of this LLC, which is just the equity in your home, not anything else that you own, including your income. So let's move on to the second level, which is sort of the intermediate level. So let's say now, not only do you have your W-2, your 1099, but now you maybe have you have a business, you have multiple real estate properties, maybe some more investments involved. You've got a little bit more assets to protect. What should you be looking at this point in time. Here, clearly, entity structuring comes into play. You still want to have your insurance. I always preach insurance is always your first line of defense. So get your insurance policies that make the most sense for you, an umbrella policy, but you want to have a backstop in case those insurance policies aren't there when you need them. And so you're going to rely more on entity structure, what I would call domestic entity structuring. You're absolutely going to have LLCs created in order to hold your property and your investments and any other. So the questions that you're really going to be asking yourself here is more along the lines of, how many LLCs should I be setting up? How many properties should I have inside LLCs, which I think we just did a video of that. We're really focused on domestic entity structuring. So you may even have a holding company up here. So that's really what you're going to be talking about with your asset protection attorney, is figuring out your entity structuring when you have multiple properties and you've moved into phase 2. At this point in time, you might start thinking about an asset protection trust, although I think it really depends on how much properties you have or what's the size of your estate. Probably going to be a domestic asset protection trust if you're at this level, but certainly we're not going to do anything fancy or anything super advanced at this point. I would really rely on a holding company, a bunch of LLCs underneath, and maybe a Nevada asset protection trust here to own all of this stuff so you remove ownership from your personal name. So we're going to drop a bunch of links in the description below to show you some of the videos we've done in the past about how to structure these and how many entities to put in and where to set them up, all these great questions that you must ask when you're at this intermediary level. And finally, when you're at the level where you really have something substantial to protect, and I'm thinking you have $3, $4, $5 million plus in assets that you're looking to protect, now we're moving into sort of the advanced asset protection structures. So that 3 to 5 million number might actually be less depending on the type of risks are associated with your profession. So for example, if you're a medical doctor or a heart surgeon or something, then you obviously have a much higher risk of getting sued. And so that limit of 3 to 5 might go down, and maybe even $1 million in assets may be worth it for you to do something a little bit more advanced. But generally speaking, at the advanced level, what you're looking at is definitely some asset protection trust. You're either looking at domestic asset protection trusts like Nevada or Alaska or some other states that have really good asset protection trusts, or you're now moving offshore. There's some great jurisdictions offshore, but again, those are expensive, and those are expensive not only to set up, but also to maintain. And so you really have to have a pretty sizable estate in order for that to make sense. And then we go into some of the advanced strategies like equity stripping, but those are the kind of things you're going to be looking at only when you're at that 3 to 5 million plus level, not when you're just starting out or have a few properties. It's really what we would consider an advanced asset protection strategy. One thing I do want to mention in all of these levels is that when people talk about having a trust, I was mentioning asset protection trust, I really am talking about an asset protection trust, which is an irrevocable trust. I'm not talking about living trust. I'm not talking about land trust. Those actually have no asset protection value whatsoever. You want those for probate and for estate planning purposes to make sure you avoid probate, or you may have them for privacy, but they have no asset protection value at all. So when I talk about trusts, I'm specifically talking about an irrevocable trust, or what we call an asset protection trust, which will protect your assets because you're legally separating the ownership to the point that you no longer own those assets. So in the coming weeks, we'll be doing some more videos, really honing down on each of these levels, but I wanted to give you guys kind of a big overview because I get this question a lot, and I know people are confused sometimes about what kind of entities or what kind of trust they should be setting up, even if they're at the beginning stages of their asset accumulation. We'll see you next time.